My breath caught in my chest as the whole dining room fell dead silent, save for the rhythmic thumping of my nephew swinging his legs against his chair. My grandfather lowered his fork, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked across the table. He asked why my parents were letting me pay them rent when I was barely making ends meet at the bakery. My throat went completely dry. My father nonchalantly wiped his mouth with a napkin, acting as if it was the most normal thing in the world, muttering that at 22, adults are supposed to contribute to the household. My mother chimed in immediately, her voice overly sweet as she reminded everyone that my older sister had 2 young kids and needed the financial relief far more than I did. I sat frozen at the far end of the long wooden table, still wearing my dark work shoes with faint flour dust caked around the seams from my early morning shift. My legs were aching, and my hands trembled slightly in my lap. Grandpa looked from my father to my mother, then turned his gaze directly toward me, asking for the exact dollar amount I was handing over every single month. My father let out a dry, forced chuckle, insisting that money was not appropriate Thanksgiving dinner conversation, but Grandpa did not back down. When I finally whispered the figure of $900, the color drained completely from my grandfather's face. Up until that exact moment, the holiday had been the usual chaotic routine centered entirely around my sister's endless personal struggles. She had arrived late, dropped her kids' heavy coats onto the sofa, and immediately complained about how expensive basic winter clothes were this year. My mother had not answered her directly. Instead, she had given me that familiar, lingering stare that meant I was expected to step up and offer financial help before anyone even asked. My father had leaned back in his chair, casually announcing to the family that I could easily cover a little extra this month since I did not have any real bills living downstairs. He always talked about my living space as if it were a luxury apartment, even though it was just a corner of an unfinished basement separated from storage boxes by a thin floral curtain. I bought my own food, paid my own phone bill, and did my laundry late at night after everyone else was finished, yet I was still handing over $900 a month just to sleep under my childhood roof. Grandpa pushed his chair back from the table, his voice low and steady as he demanded to know why his youngest granddaughter was paying market-rate rent to live in her own family cellar. My mother tried to deflect, claiming I was young and single, so helping out was the least I could do instead of acting like my life was difficult. When Grandpa asked how long this arrangement had been going on, I quietly admitted it had been happening since my 21st birthday, causing the entire room to shift into an uncomfortable, tense silence. Grandpa did not yell, which somehow made the situation infinitely scarier. He picked up a stack of empty dessert plates and quietly instructed me to follow him into the kitchen. My mother tried to stop me, but Grandpa gave a cold, sharp response that made it very clear he was not asking for anyone's permission. Inside the quiet kitchen, away from the heavy pressure of the dining room, Grandpa set the plates down and quietly demanded the absolute truth about what was happening. I kept my eyes glued to the linoleum floor, trying to make excuses by explaining that my father said it built character and my mother claimed it helped my sister stay afloat. I told him how my sister had moved back in 8 months ago when childcare costs surged, and how my monthly contribution had quietly crept up from $400 to $900 overnight. When Grandpa asked if I paid for my own clothes, transportation, and medical needs entirely on my own, I nodded softly, realizing how ridiculous my defensive excuses sounded out loud. I confessed that I had attempted to move out twice before, but every time I saved a small cushion, a sudden family crisis arose that required my hard-earned savings. Grandpa stayed silent for a moment before asking if I had ever received any official mail from the community credit union located downtown. I blinked in confusion, explaining that I rarely saw the Daily Mail because my mother always collected it and placed my personal letters on the basement stairs. Grandpa's knuckles turned white against the edge of the kitchen counter as he asked if I was entirely certain about never seeing those specific financial statements. Before he could elaborate, my mother glided into the kitchen with a tense, artificial smile, demanding to know what private details we were whispering about behind everyone's back. Ignoring her completely, Grandpa marched straight into the front hallway toward the wooden mail cabinet, pulling open the squeaky door so hard it rattled against the wall. My father rushed out of the dining room, shouting that Grandpa had no right to go snooping through private family storage during a holiday dinner. Grandpa began pulling out stacks of old instruction manuals, tax folders, and rubber-banded envelopes, searching for something specific while my sister watched nervously from the doorway. He pulled 2 formal white envelopes from the very back of the cabinet, both addressed clearly to me from the local credit union, with one already torn open. My mother tried to snatch them away, claiming it was nothing more than junk mail, but Grandpa held them high out of her reach. My father raised his voice, warning Grandpa not to cause a public scene and embarrass the family over a simple household rent agreement. My sister stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly as she admitted she thought I had willingly agreed to pay extra rent to help cover her auto loan and childcare expenses. Hearing her say that hit me like a bucket of ice water, realizing I was working relentless double shifts at the bakery while my family casually spent my earnings behind my back. Grandpa carefully unfolded the paper from the open letter, scanning the printed lines until his eyes widened in deep shock and sorrow. He looked at my parents with complete disgust, asking them how long they had been aware of the sizable trust fund account that had been established in my name. My mother went pale, while my father attempted to regain control of the room by ordering everyone back to the table before the food got cold. Instead of backing down, Grandpa walked back into the dining room and slammed the bank document flat onto the table, right next to the serving dishes for everyone to see. My uncle walked through the front door right at that moment holding a dessert pie, stopping dead in his tracks as he realized he had walked into a massive confrontation. Grandpa announced to the entire room that my parents had been intentionally hiding my financial statements from me for well over a year. He explained that after my grandmother passed away, a private trust account had been set up to give me a financial foundation the moment I turned 21. My mother had lied to Grandpa months ago, claiming I was aware of the money but was simply taking my time deciding how to invest it. All the pieces suddenly fell into place, explaining why every attempt I made to move into a tiny studio apartment was met with sudden financial guilt trips from my parents. My father tried to justify their actions, angrily claiming I was too young to handle that kind of money and would have simply wasted it instead of helping the family. The confession hung heavy in the air, confirming that my parents had deliberately withheld my inheritance so they could keep extracting monthly rent from me. Grandpa folded the bank document, handed it directly into my trembling hands, and told me to grab my coat because I was leaving with him immediately. My mother rushed to block the front doorway, insisting I was not allowed to leave over a ridiculous misunderstanding stirred up by my grandfather. Before she could finish her sentence, my uncle stepped forward, urging my mother to stop lying and come clean about the illegal withdrawals they had been making. My uncle confessed that he had overheard my parents months ago planning to use money connected to my account to pay off my sister's vehicle debt. My father slammed his hand onto the table in a rage, but Grandpa stood firm, refusing to let them intimidate anyone in the room any longer. My mother brokenly pleaded that they only did what was necessary to keep the household standing during difficult financial times. I looked my mother in the eye and told her that the family was not holding together on its own, but was being carried entirely on my back from the basement. Grandpa made it clear that the trust fund was meant to secure my future, providing enough capital for a security deposit, a reliable vehicle, and independence. He pointed out how absurd it was that I was deemed mature enough to pay $900 a month in rent, yet considered too immature to hold my own bank account. My sister broke down in tears, claiming she had no idea my parents were deceiving me to gather the funds they were giving her. I looked at my father and told him he was not the provider he claimed to be, but rather the person ensuring I could never earn enough to gain my freedom. Grandpa stepped between my father and me, shielding me as my mother began to weep loudly, expecting me to comfort her as I always did. For the first time in my life, I did not apologize or try to fix things, standing firm as I asked them how long they intended to keep me trapped downstairs. The dead silence that followed was the only answer I needed, proving that they had planned to exploit my labor indefinitely. I walked down to the cold basement one last time, smelling the stale air and looking at my modest belongings tucked neatly away. I packed my duffel bag with essential clothes, my bank documents, and the notebook where I meticulously logged every single transfer I had ever made to my father. When I returned upstairs, my uncle was using his phone to take clear photographs of the financial papers and rent receipts to ensure I had legal evidence. My sister whispered a tearful apology as I passed, but I simply told her that genuine help should never come at the expense of someone else's survival. Grandpa drove me away from that house as the cold November wind howled outside, neither of us saying a word as the streetlights swept across the car interior. The following morning, Grandpa accompanied me to the credit union, where the bank officer immediately updated my profile to remove my parents from every single file. The account balance was completely intact, meaning my parents had not been able to withdraw the core funds directly, but had successfully blocked me from finding out it existed. With the financial records secured and my uncle backing my story, my parents' financial control shattered instantly as the rest of the extended family learned the truth. Within weeks, my parents were forced to deal with a sudden $900 hole in their monthly budget, while my sister had to secure her own childcare assistance. I moved into a small, bright studio apartment of my own, furnished with thrifted items and a simple bed frame that Grandpa helped me put together. It was quiet, modest, and completely mine, without anyone checking my mail, tracking my hours, or demanding my paycheck at the end of the month. A few days after settling in, Grandpa visited my new place, holding a small box of kitchen utensils he had gathered from his garage to help me get started. As I unpacked the items, I realized that for the very first time in my adult life, I was finally standing on my own 2 feet, completely free.